surprising polling numbers, deep cultural fractures, and stark economic warnings. Okay, let's jump right in. Today, this explainer is pulling back the curtain on a highly revealing panel broadcast. We're looking at the shifting, totally volatile dynamics of Australian politics right now. So, if you want to understand the undercurrents actually driving voter sentiment today, well, you are in exactly the right place.
To unpack all this complex commentary, we're going to explore 4 key themes from the broadcast. We've got the polling shakeup, the Hansen phenomenon, the immigration debate, and finally, Victoria's economic warning.
Okay, part 1, the polling shakeup. Let's take a look at the latest data. So here's the data that basically sparked this entire conversation. According to a recent highly reputable news poll, One Nation is actually sitting level with the Labour Party at a 30% primary vote. Meanwhile, the coalition, they're lagging significantly behind at just 19%. I mean, One Nation has regained massive ground here. It really signals this huge fracture in traditional voting patterns, something the mainstream parties are clearly struggling to grapple with right now.
But, there's a really fascinating contradiction here. Despite those massive shifts we just saw in primary voting intentions, Anthony Albanese actually continues to maintain his lead as the preferred prime minister over Angus Taylor. So it's like voters are looking completely outside the major parties on the primary vote, but they're still kind of leaning toward the incumbent for the actual top job. Wild, right?
Moving on to part 2, the Hansen phenomenon and this rising anti-establishment wave.
To explain this, Nick Cater, he's a senior fellow at the Menzies Research Center, offered a really powerful comparison. He argues that a, quote, Farage-shaped hole has opened up in the Australian electorate. Cater points out that over a third of the electorate are effectively just voting none of the above. We're talking about voters who are completely, utterly disillusioned with both mainstream parties. And because of that, they're organically gravitating toward Pauline Hanson as this ultimate anti-establishment voice.
And this dynamic brilliantly illustrates the totally contrasting views on her success. On one hand, commentators like Cater view Hanson as the sick of the lot of you candidate, right? Basically, a receptacle for all that deep voter frustration. But then, on the other hand, political opponents like the Greens are actively shifting their framing. They're treating her not as some fringe populist anymore, but as a highly calculating threat. Take Green Senator Sarah Hanson-Young, for example. She recently labeled Hanson as the trickiest politician who knows exactly what she's doing. And former Liberal MP Nicole Flint, she points out that this specific messaging is almost certainly pulled straight from focus groups. It's a deliberate pivot. They're stepping away from calling her naive, and instead they're warning voters not to be fooled by a 30-year political veteran. All right, part 3, the immigration debate and the root of this voter frustration.
So what is actually fueling all this anti-establishment sentiment? Well, according to Flint, a major factor is current immigration policy. She points out that 1.5 million people have been admitted to Australia recently under the Labour government. Now, just to put that massive number into perspective, that population increase happening in just a few short years is literally larger than the entire city of Adelaide. Let that sink in for a second.
But the panel argued that the public's concern isn't just numerical, it's deeply cultural. Flint suggested that many Australians are feeling like these new arrivals don't always share or respect foundational national values. The discussion specifically highlighted voter anxieties around a few things: a perceived disrespect for Judeo-Christian values and the Westminster parliamentary system, challenges to equality for women, and really alarming reports that Jewish Australians are currently feeling very unsafe. So the core argument here is that voters feel the actual social fabric itself is under serious strain. And Cater adds to this whole sentiment of an overwhelmed system by highlighting another staggering figure. Because beyond just permanent migration, he notes there are currently 3 million people in Australia on various temporary or bridging visas. We're talking international students and others staying long-term without permanent status. 3 million. Cater actually draws a really direct contrast here between two very distinct eras. He points out that, sure, Australia isn't currently facing the illegal boat migration issues we saw back in 2013. But this massive pool of 3 million temporary migrants, it creates this equivalent feeling that the system is just totally out of control. And the takeaway was that until voters feel that control is restored, parties like One Nation are just going to continue harvesting all that frustration. Which brings us to our final section, part 4, Victoria's warning and those stark economic concerns at the state level. So, pivoting away from those federal cultural debates and looking straight at the bottom line, the commentators dug into some pretty alarming revelations about the financial health of Victoria.
Reports recently emerged that former Victorian Labour Treasurer Tim Pallas reportedly sought a federal rescue plan, like a full-on bailout, in 2024. I mean, this raises some massive questions about the fiscal sustainability of one of Australia's largest state economies.
Now, despite the Victorian government's ongoing claims that they are completely financially secure, Cater forcefully argued the opposite. He said their spending is just entirely out of control. In fact, he noted that Victoria actually holds the largest per capita borrowing of any state in the country right now. And to illustrate this alleged fiscal recklessness, he pointed to some major decisions, like paying out massive sums of money to Scotland simply to cancel and hand over the Commonwealth Games.
The crucial point Cater is making here is a direct causal chain, and it's one that actually affects everyone. Think about it. It starts with state spending getting out of control. If that debt causes Victoria to literally go broke, well, that financial burden doesn't just magically vanish. It will inevitably fall right onto the Commonwealth. That means every single taxpayer across Australia, absolutely regardless of where you live, could be forced to foot the bill for Victoria's financial mismanagement.
Which leaves us with this final, absolutely critical question. We've seen the stunning poll numbers, the deep cultural anxieties regarding immigration, and now this looming threat of state-level economic failure. So the ultimate question raised by this broadcast is simply this. Are the major mainstream parties actually capable of navigating these deep economic and cultural divides? Or are they just going to continue to lose ground to alternatives like One Nation before the pressure finally boils over? It is a truly fascinating political landscape, and it's one we're definitely going to be watching closely. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. And as always, keep questioning what's behind the headlines.